Hello, fellow Philosophs, and welcome back to Knowing You Know Nothing. This is episode number 41, and we are back from our little 2-week hiatus, a little bit of a break. And just to reiterate, the purpose of this podcast is really just my individual journey of learning as much philosophy and having as many interesting conversations as I can with people and just sharing those out. So it just means a lot to me to have anyone invest their time into watching the YouTube channel or listening to the podcast. A little bit of house cleaning, just looking ahead. Again, our new logo is from a former student of mine named Kirsten Binkley. You can find her on kirstenbinkley.art on Instagram. I'll put a link to that in the description of the podcast and on the YouTube channel. Additionally, this month, looking ahead, we're going to be doing another movie episode with Eric Harris, a movie critic, called No Country for Old Men. A very good book, very good movie. I cannot wait to have that discussion with him and Cody Watkins, another person that was on the podcast before. We're going to do another video game this month at some point called Soma, basically a psychological horror mystery kind of game. And Litha Paige will be on with us again for that too later on. And then, of course, next week I'm going to do an episode that's kind of an occupational one again. A couple of my former students focus their career field in nursing, and that's something that I've had a couple of students contact me on, and they would love to do an episode based on going to school for nursing, doing your master's after that's all over. So I think that would be a great one to follow up the occupational therapy episode that we did on the last one. So without further ado, let's jump right into this episode. I couldn't wait. I've been talking to this gentleman for about 2 months now, trying to work out a good time for both of us to do this episode. I started listening to his podcast probably about a month and a half ago, and he's also, just like me, just really got it started this year. But his entire premise for his podcast I'm extremely interested in. So I couldn't help but have one of my guests back, and I'll introduce her first because she's co-hosting the podcast with me tonight. But as many of you know that listen to the podcast, her background is involved in child development and pre-K for teaching. And I thought she would love this episode tonight and really enjoy being on here with the host of Lil Philosophers. So I want to welcome back Litha Paige. Litha, how's it feel to be back? I think this is your 6th or 7th podcast episode back. How's it feel?
It's feels pretty good. I think I'm in the lead for the most on your podcast now, so I'm pretty excited for that one. For everyone else who have been on this podcast, I'm kind of posting a little competition with myself, but that's okay. Anyway, I'm really excited to be back. Thank you so much for having me back. I know you just mentioned a little bit about myself, but I'll tell you a little bit more. My name is Litha. My major was early child development master's teachers. I've been a early child care teacher for about 3 years now. I went to school in San Diego, and now I am here in Kentucky, and I'm really excited. Thank you so much for having me, Robbie.
Well, you're very welcome, and we are really excited to have you on the show. And then to our main special guest, this is his first time, hopefully not his last time on the podcast. Hopefully Litha and I don't freak him out and scare him away, and hopefully he enjoys his time on here. So my guest is the host of a podcast entitled Lil Philosophers, so LIL apostrophe Philosophers. We'll make sure we'll show a visual of that here in a little bit. And his name is Josh Perry. Josh, we are so honored to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this, the whole time we've been talking.
Yeah, I know. We've been communicating a little bit over Twitter, a little bit over Facebook. I agree with you. I think Facebook's a little bit easier for us to message each other on. I know if I think your podcast has been 5 or 6 episodes, I may be wrong on the total amount of episodes there. You might have a little bit more, a little less. Either way, you and I are both still pretty early in our podcasting experience, and I know it can be a rather oversaturated market for different topics, but I have to be honest with you, for what you do, I have not been able to find that anywhere. And I think that you're really tapping into something that's deep and it's intrinsical, and I just really think it means a lot. And we're going to get into really why you did that, but just to give a general outlook for people, the podcast is really for children. It's introducing children, parents, aunts, uncles, guardians, anybody that really works with children to philosophy very early. And I swear about a year ago or so, Litha and I were having this conversation that I wish that we could start philosophy with kindergartners in school. And I do it with my sophomores all the time with juniors, and I use philosophy. And I thought, many other countries, they require philosophy as a core class to take. And I thought, who's to say you can't start really young? And then I just stumbled across, I think, your Twitter one day, or your YouTube, like your actual podcast. And I thought, this is perfect. Here's a guy that like myself, you don't have a degree, I think, in philosophy, but you have this strong interest that was recently gained. But you decided to grab the bull metaphorically by the horns and really go into that. So I guess a good place to start, Josh, is really getting to know the foundation of really who you are, and then we'll get into the specifics about what really inspired you to do the podcast. So just to start off for our listeners, could you maybe give us a general idea about your educational background, your professional one, a little bit maybe about your family?
Sure, yeah. So first of all, I'm a dad of 3 boys, 5, 2.5, and 4 months. So pretty busy, got a full household now. Let's see, my education. So I actually started as a chemical engineer at Clarkson University for a couple of years. And I didn't have a whole lot of what you might call fun in high school. So I had a whole lot of fun when I was in college. And that caused me to leave Clarkson about 2.5 years in. Went back home, worked a couple of jobs, and got an opportunity to work in a chemistry lab. And my mom had been a pharmacy technician for probably about 15 years at that point in time. And she was like, Josh, you should probably go to pharmacy school. I think that'd be great for you. So I looked into it. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing with my life right now. And I'm like, this sounds great. Love to do that. Plus the paycheck's not anything to shake a stick at either. So I was like, yeah, why not? I think I could do it. So I started taking pharmacy classes, and I got into Shenandoah University as a pharmacist, pharmacy school there. Graduated after 4 years. That was about 10 years total education. Did a residency at a community hospital nearby. Met my wife while I was in pharmacy school, and she got an opportunity to come out here to Colorado and work for a hospital that also had a children's hospital connected to it, because that's what she always wanted to do. So 2 pharmacists, just living in Colorado now. Yeah, so absolutely no training in philosophy. But the whole road to philosophy, I don't want to go on about religion, but I became an atheist probably 4.5 years ago. I only mention that because that was the point that philosophy was brought into my life. Because I was what you'd call a lukewarm Christian, right, for most of my life till I left Clarkson, and I was like, my life is a wreck. I don't know what to do. So I'm like, maybe this is because I wasn't a good enough Christian. So I buckled down. I stopped listening to secular music. I only listened to Christian music. I didn't go to a church, but I regularly studied and read my Bible. I definitely, it took over my life for multiple years. And I got in really deep. And it was when I started working in the emergency department, which was almost 10 years now. Whew, getting old.
I'm good, really fast.
Right. So about 10 years ago, I started working in the emergency department as a pharmacist. A lot of people don't know what that entails, but basically for traumas, code blues, all these very serious things, I'm at the bedside. I'm mixing up medications. I'm handing over medications. I'm verifying doses, giving recommendations, all those things. So I'm standing next to the nurses and doctors while everything's happening, whatever it is that's happening. So I got to see a lot of things. And there's a pediatric case that came in, and it disturbed me a lot. The child didn't make it. There's some circumstances around it. We can get into it if you're curious. But the day after that, I had an existential crisis. I remember this moment. I typed in "what is God" into Google, And I'm like, I'm just going to hit enter and just see what happens. And that led me down a road to where I was like, well, what is it? What's the basis of my religion? Why do I believe what I do? And I didn't have any really great reasons. So I started looking up like apologists, started looking up like William Lane Craig and Dinesh D'Souza and I can't think of all the names now. There's one in England. I'm blanking on him. Allison, right? Yeah, those guys were great, but there were people like Sam Harris and Hitchens and Dawkins, and they were the ones that were debating these guys back and forth. And instead of strengthening my faith, it brought me away from it. And at the same time, I was reading and studying about not what was in the Bible, but about the Bible stories themselves. And then, a lot of these arguments that you see in these debates are philosophical based questions. And that's the origination of how I got into philosophy. I was like, wow, like they started asking meta questions and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. And like, these were the things that I was curious about when I was 17, 18, 19 years old. Like that was the time when the first Matrix movie came out.
Yeah.
Man,
it's another philosophy reference movie.
Like that movie blew my mind. It's like, to this day, it's probably my favorite movie of all time. But now I know why, because I can see all that philosophy behind it. I can see all the questions that it makes you think about. And I just love that stuff. And then I thought about, well, I was 18, and then I got involved with, I'm going to name drop another podcast. These guys, it's called Answers in Reason. They're a bunch of British guys. If you're listening, hey guys, I got in with them on Twitter, and so when I got into Twitter, so the whole reason I got into Twitter was because I started to try to have religious conversations on Facebook, and I was told that was not the right thing to do. So I was like, well, where can I go to talk about this stuff? And somebody was like, you should check out Twitter if you don't have a Twitter account. So I got onto Twitter and I was like, this is amazing. Like you can rant and comment and ask questions and like
280 characters to try to fit it all.
Yeah, just like go to town. So, I started doing that, and I ran into these guys, the Answers in Reason guys, and they pulled me out of that. I don't know if there's a stereotypical atheist Twitter crowd, but if there is one, I got pulled out of it, and I got shown all the philosophy stuff. One of the guys is getting his master's in philosophy right now, and the rest of the guys love talking about it. And we had a serious conversation about morality and whether it's subjective or objective. And man, after having that kind of a conversation, I started following them. I started getting into philosophy. A great resource if people want it is, oh, no, I'm blanking because I got a camera in front of me probably.
I will say this, Josh, just the fact that you're bringing it up this episode, I'm pretty sure by the end, that podcast has just gained 2 other listeners now.
Yeah, you should definitely check them out. They're good.
It's cool because, if you don't mind me interjecting just real quick.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
A little bit of a break too. And by the way, I highly value what you had shared. I'm sorry that some of the things that you had to see. For me, I became secular probably when I was 31 is when I really started to fall back and ask questions. Like yourself, I was always like a warm weather kind of religious outlook on things. But now it's weird because I catch myself reading more of the Bible and annotating it and asking questions and having discussions more now than I ever did when I was so-called called myself that. And for one thing is I try to explain to people, it's not that I wake up every day thinking, oh, I can't wait to not believe in God today. Like I wake up wanting to look for meaning, wanting to search for meaning, but I also don't feel like it's fair for me to just call myself something without actually putting the work in, without actually really understanding it. And the great thing about here, and people may not think this about Kentucky, but there actually really are a lot of open-minded people to the point where if you have questions about morality or religion or something, there are a lot of people, especially within the churches, that will talk to you and will answer your questions. It's not like everybody's ready to throw holy water on you and shun you away, that kind of outlook. But a podcast like you had mentioned earlier, that's right up my alley of that's the kind of things I want to do. I want to go to places where I can have this conversation. I've always heard that Twitter's not a great place to have the conversations, but I will say Twitter's a great place to network, to find people, to find this guy. I guess I would just say it's hard to get things wrapped up in a certain amount of characters sometimes to convey things, because people can be very short-sighted on what they think you're trying to say. But what I can say that you have a Facebook group page for Little Philosophers, and we have one for Knowing You Know Nothing. I wanted to create a safe space for people to go to be open-minded, to agree and disagree with each other and not harass. Not like your general wall, like your general feed is just one thing after another of neo left or neo right, and everything has to be political, even though they say it's not political. But it's like I'd rather just have a place for people to go to. But I guess the concern is how do you do that without creating some kind of an echo chamber? Because you don't want that either. You do want people to have conflicting, dissenting opinions sometimes. So I really highly respect that from you, Josh. I have to be honest with you. I don't know if Litha will agree, but I've listened to all of your episodes at least twice, and some of them 3 times. And I'm going to be honest with you, I never got the impression that you were atheist or agnostic or anything from those. You do have rationalism involved and consequentialism and epistemology and whatnot, but you do your podcast in a way that whether a family is religious or they're not religious, they're going to be able to get a lot of value out of your podcast, because it's just teaching kids to think and to ask questions, and it's okay to talk. I love that about yours. So that's cool, Josh. I didn't even know that about you. Litha, I just want to toss this over to you as a co-host with me today. After listening to Josh's introduction about himself, is there anything that you would like to say to Josh?
Well, I'm excited because, of course, I never pictured like you. I didn't even think about religion when it came to your questions and such. Actually, every single time I listened to one of your podcasts, I would just get, I guess, Reggio happy. Is that a good way to say it? Reggio is a type of teaching philosophy, and it's just basically where you question everything, and not just question everything, but question in a way where you hope that their answers their own question. So like mainly open-ended questions, not really closed-ended, where it's not like yes or no and why or anything like that. It's more so, how do you feel? How do you think they feel? What do you think they're doing? Where do you think they're going? Like in like stories. There's some of the stories that you were reading, I've actually read, like The Velveteen Rabbit and such. Very popular stories with the early child development, but early childhood teaching wise. But there's some stories that I'm hoping that you do. I really do hope that you go into more so. I hope you just get and gain as much as you want from this, because I get so happy when I see another episode that you create, and I'm like, I wonder what he's gonna ask, like, and stuff. And so sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, I'll skip to your questions first, and then I'll rewatch your actual story of the video. So because that's what I did whenever I was teaching. I would ask the questions, and then I would read the story, and then I would ask the questions again to see if I swayed them at all throughout the story. So I'm really excited for that, and I can't wait to watch you grow with your podcasting too.
I try to put one out every Saturday now.
Yeah.
Because they're not very long, they're only like between 5 or 10 minutes long. But the whole point is that I try to do about 10 questions per episode. So the whole point is for you and your kids to take 5 minutes, for a question, or 2 or 3 minutes, and hopefully that podcast turns into a half an hour or 45 minutes,
Yeah, I hope that even teachers, I think, should actually listen, especially if they're like kindergarten, preschool, pre-K, or infants, even, toddlers. in any of those, just early childcare teachers or early childhood teachers should really listen to your podcast just to get a sense of how you can question in a way that provokes thought. And that's what I love about how you're questioning, is that you're questioning in a way where the kid will have to respond the child will have to respond in a way that gets them to free think, like, oh, what do I think? And like not actually be provided with the answer. We want to know what they think, and everyone can be different and no one is wrong. And that's what I really like about it. So I wanted to tell you that earlier too.
So Litha and Robbie, have either of you guys heard of the Jana Moore?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh yeah, of course. I'll bring her up. Actually, that if you don't mind, real quick, Josh, that would be a good chance to show something while you're doing it. She is the author, I think, of this book on the left.
Oh, that's her philosophy and education book. I was wondering if that was the one you're talking about. Yeah, it's Jana Moore alone.
Yeah.
So, this is kind of getting into where I got the idea to do this, but talking with the Answers and Reason guys, and starting to have kids, and one of them has kids, and I was like, I wonder how you teach your kids about Plato. And so I just type in like philosophy and kids in Google and hit this button, and I found her. So Jana Moore Lone, she is the director of the Children for Philosophy in Washington University. And I use her website. I asked her, she's got a plethora of books on there. They've got those questions that I go by. I don't always copy everything that they do, but that's where I get my source for a lot of like, oh, this book is about these types of things. And I use her website a lot. It's an amazing resource. And then I saw it and I was like, she goes to other schools all around, I think it's Seattle, all around Washington. And she goes to get kindergarten classes or first and second grades, and she reads them a story and they talk about it for a half an hour. And she has anecdotes about, hilarious stories about going off in different tangents. And it was great. And I was like, why is this not available to everybody out there? Why? I mean, it would be so easy just to read a kid's story, ask a couple of questions, and then sign off and be like, hey, this would be great for you guys to talk about. Use it however you want.
Yeah.
So
Josh, along that
that's
line,
kind of where it came from.
Yeah, it's crazy that you said it, because this is the book that you're talking about, and that's the one that I said I read last year when I flew to San Diego, going to observe a high school there. That I ended up reading this entire thing because it shows you how you can implement it as a class from kindergarten all the way up to seniors in high school. And I'm a sophomore high school teacher in history, and I'm like, well, why can I not ask more philosophical questions? When Litha was alluding to the question that teachers could take away from your podcast, from Jana Moore, and she's messaged me on Twitter and replied. She's so friendly, and she's very
great.
She's great to give you. She gave me several resources, and I thought it was so great. But you're right. I guess the access is there. It's just that I think that it needs to be marketed in a way that more people can see that this is something that could be used very effectively. And Litha brought up a good point about learning from your style of questioning and from hers. And it's funny because at the beginning of the show, you kind of sold yourself short. You were like, well, I don't have teacher training. I don't do this thing. But Litha and I were watching because, I do a sports podcast too, as you probably see sometimes on my Facebook. Yeah. I'm an Indiana Hoosier originally, so I do with my twin brother on that. But we had a softball coach from Indiana University. She has a famous phrase she tells her players called honoring the pause. And I have to say, from a strategic teaching point, you do that very well. And I struggle with that as a teacher, is when you ask questions, I notice that you make a point to wait 2 or 3 seconds. So it gives the listeners, the parents, a chance to pause it. Hey, talk to your kids about it, stuff. They can always go back and play it again. And that's something that goes into questioning. And sometimes people think that questioning has to be all content recall. And people like you, people like Jana, are saying it doesn't have to be always about content recall only. Ask a why or how or causation question. Like I noticed, Josh, like me, you're big into context. if I post a quote on the Facebook page, you're one of the first people to ask me, what context was this quote in or the speech in? Because that's really important in understanding everything that's on there. So, Josh, I really, it's cool to know that we're both influenced by the same kind of educator then from the Seattle parts. And that goes great. Just to kind of transition a little bit into the next segment,
Sure.
if you don't mind me doing, we, as you know from listening to the show before too, that we'll try to do a little bit of philosophy at the beginning and a little bit at the end if we have time to do that. Because you remind me of someone that could be very inspired by Fred Rogers or Mr. Rogers. Some of our listeners may be too young to remember him, but I know that you and I grew up in an era where it was at the tail end of his career, but he was still really popular. And he was becoming more popular again this year with Tom Hanks playing him in a movie. You saw that documentary, which by the way, I can't remember the name of the documentary, Josh, but if you have a chance to watch it, highly recommend it. The one that really goes into the behind the scenes of the show. I plan on putting a few of the audio drops from that documentary in this podcast. So when the episode starts, you're going to hear probably him talk about assassination, because the story that you did, the fables, a lot of the fables you do from Aesop's deal with death. And I thought, man, when we were driving into Evansville this weekend, Litha and I were like, some of these are really dark. And you do such a good job of answering those. And that's why I like how you approach things with kid gloves, but not too kid-like. You don't patronize them or anything like that. So I decided to pick a small quote from Mr. Rogers just to see if you agreed with his philosophy, and you and Litha. So I'll read the quote for our listeners, and I'll put it on the top of the screen for the YouTube video. And Mr. Rogers says, anyone who does anything to help a child in his life is a hero to me. So, Josh, I guess what I want to ask is, do you agree or disagree with what Mr. Rogers' philosophy in regards to that quote?
Yes, definitely. So let's talk about some philosophy lingo, right? Tabula rasa. So basically, tabula rasa is a term that's quite often used in philosophy, and it just means blank slate, right? So so kids are blank slates when they're born. They have no idea. They just go by your word for probably the first 3, 4, 5, maybe 12, 13, depending on, what kind of environment they grow up in. But they're just so curious. Kids are so curious about the world, and naturally curious. Like my 2.5-year-old isn't quite there yet. He'll be 3 in October. But man, my 5-year-old, he's turning 5 the end of August. Man, he's just getting there. He gets annoyed with questions, but he's my guinea pig. So, but anyway, yeah, I mean, teaching kids anything, teaching them anything is, well, I shouldn't say anything. And I guess that's where the problem is in the quote, right? It's not teaching them anything. It's teaching them good things and having good reasons to call them good things, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's part of my philosophy behind this podcast is that there's so much information out there. I mean, you can remember when we were in elementary and in high school. I grew up in a little town. We didn't get a computer lab in our school until I was like a sophomore or junior in high school. But man, the internet, like teachers don't have to. I mean, yes, you have to teach things, but all that knowledge that is in all the textbooks is just out there. It's a Google away. You don't have to read chapters in a textbook to pick stuff up. You can go to Wikipedia, or you can go to, a university, and read something on one of their websites. So part of the reason, that I did the podcast was that philosophy is, in my opinion, the best way to weed out good information from bad information. And I think that is more important now, and will always be more important now that kids have access to everything, because they have got access to Brian Greene and Neil deGrasse Tyson and famous scientists and authors and, these amazing sources to teach them things, but they also have access to flat earthers and anti-vaxxers, and young earth creationists. And
See, that's what I was going to devil's advocate you on, just as a
I
way
was
of
just
thinking.
about to do the same
Because of all the
thing.
information out there, everybody and their mother has a megaphone now, so they all want to post certain things. And again, as a teacher, you know that Wikipedia is one of those things that these last 10 or 15 years, everybody's like, don't use Wikipedia. But I mean, I'll even say there are good things that could be used on Wikipedia. It's just that I'll tell students, just make sure you vet it and cross-check
exactly,
it 2 or 3 times. I mean, but the fact that people can go and easily edit things, but you also bring up good points. I mean, for the last few years, you've seen Yale offer free classes. You're seeing, I've done a free class over death for philosophy that I need to send you the link to later on. A fantastic professor, I think back in 2010, recorded a series of, I think, 18 videos, 18 class sessions over death, and it was fantastic. But it's so cool because I don't know if you listened to that John Altman episode that I did where I had the philosopher
Yep.
spotlight on, but one of the most profound things that he said that I think that you probably would agree with is he wishes that knowledge would be free. That you're starting to see more and more websites put up paywalls behind things, but all this access to information that you can get, you wish that people shouldn't have to be wealthy to have access to gain knowledge about the world around them. That kind of is like a similar philosophy to what he was getting to. I do agree with you on the access to information. Now, in some ways, teachers need to become more like facilitators than necessarily standing up and getting the old school lecture that we might have received whenever we were younger. But it's cool. And what I like about Mr. Rogers' quote too, there is something metaphysical about it too, because what I usually do with my students, and Litha knows I wear them out on this, whenever we do a quote or a question, if anybody even answers it before we psychoanalyze, if we break down whatever it's on there, we lose credit in class. Like if they jump the gun and just go right. So if it's a question as simple as what is good or what is bad, we always break down the question first. So like in this one, I'm always stuck on the word help, because I think that if you don't metaphysically understand the substance of what Mr. Rogers means when he says help, because like you said earlier, Josh, you don't want to just teach a kid everything or anything. Like I'm not going to Breaking Bad it and start showing a kid how to make meth. That's not. It's not a science experiment in that kind of way. But you're thinking of things that are truly beneficial. So then the individual has to go, okay, if you're helping, I might ask children, well, what does it mean to really help someone? What would you consider to be help if someone helped you or if you're helping another person? And you get back to the origin question of what is good, because what is good for me may not be good for you, Josh. And good might be relative or subjective. And before you know it, as you know, what I like about philosophy questions, what students hate at first, what your sons probably hated, is it kind of opens up Pandora's box a little bit. You can go down a rabbit hole and kind of never get out, and before you know it, you're not even answering the question anymore. But I do like about what you had went on that. I guess, Litha, I just wanted to ask, do you have anything to follow up with Josh on after just kind of addressing Mr. Rogers' quote?
So, yes, I do. So, of course, the quote is, any person who helps the child is a hero in my eyes. And you had mentioned teaching in replace for helps, and I like that. But I think that help can go in many different ways. So even if it is, I don't know, to stop and tie their shoe or whatever it is that they need, or maybe they drop their doll, like just help goes in many different ways within that quote. And then something that you had said that made me question was good info and bad info. You said that there was good info on the internet and there was bad info on the internet. And I literally, like when Robbie was talking, I had already written this stuff down and such. And because this is all I do in the beginning is just write stuff down for whatever. And yeah, but anyway, you had mentioned good info and bad info, and then I was going to ask, what's the difference? Because info is info, and of course, good and bad are subjective. But also, mainly, well, you followed up by stating like flat earthers and such, and I think that's where you were trying to go along with bad info or whatever, however you shall have it. But I was going to ask you, back to what I was saying, what is good info and what is your bad info?
So that's the whole point of, so in the podcast, I try never to I'll put an opinion at the end of the questions, but I try never to make it something controversial. I try to keep it light. I still try to keep what I'm saying general, because I want the podcast to really be about epistemology.
Yeah.
And in teaching that. And it's not it's something that I say, I don't know if I'd picked it up from somebody else, but we should teach kids how to think, not what to think. So what we should be teaching them is how to decipher at some point in time, like logical fallacies, or just teach them about the basics of logic. Teach them how to pick things out, to spot things. Basically, one of my friends says it's to tune up their BS reader. You know what I mean? So when you hear something, you don't necessarily say like, "Oh, that's wrong," or "That's right." You say, something's not firing on all cylinders here. Let me take a look at it. Let me assess it. Let me see if I can really tease anything out. Does that seem right? Does that follow from what we know, in science, per se? But yeah, it's about how to assess the things that you hear and get good at finding good reasons to believe things, and not just because, like, so I got in, my dad put up a conspiracy video about the Democrats are responsible for COVID-19, and they'd been planning it for like the last 7 or 8 years or something. I'm like, how, like I watched the video and I'm like, yes, if you just blindly watch the video, what this guy says makes perfect sense. He lines up all the facts. He plays the music behind it to make it feel a certain way. All the dominoes line up, and you're like, this guy has got it. I can't believe it. I can't believe the Democrats were behind COVID-19. And then I just started picking it apart. I'm like, does this sound right? What does this mean? Are there facts behind this stuff? Did he make this up? So it's like, it's mostly that conspiracy type stuff that I'm really trying to keep them aware of. Yeah.
In a way, from a psychological perspective, you're also preparing children for confirmation bias and groupthink, and addressing, trying to avoid those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely. Just constantly challenging your own beliefs. I do that all the time. I've been showed so many times that what I thought was absolutely right is not, or I've been given very good reasons that I haven't been able to find responses to. So I have to believe that. I mean, that's how you be a rational person. If somebody presents you with good, solid arguments and you don't have a rebuttal, or you don't have any other reason not to believe it, then it's rational to change your belief to whatever you are presented with, until you find even better evidence that might overturn it back the other way.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing a nicer way of saying what I think Ben Shapiro often references when he says facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, when you say something reasonable or something that's rational, it might go against something that you have, intrinsic, deep feelings for, and especially for young people, it's like, well, my mom and dad feel this way, my uncle feels this way, my aunt feels this way. Why would they lie about that? Why would they? I mean, or people at my job and my church or places like that feel this way. Why would this be a lie? Why would this lead me astray? But I think that it's weird because you're not saying that people should get rid of the foundation or their aim or their purpose that gives them meaning, but they should still feel willing to question themselves. I guess sometimes I'll get people that feel like if I say to question your own thoughts, that I'm also trying to say, well, just disregard everything that you believed in before. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that be willing to question yourself. I mean, there's things that even 5 years ago I look back on that I used to believe strongly that I was kind of surprised that I would do on. But I guess this would be a good place to, Josh, to move into our questions. You've already actually knocked out a few of them in the list.
Yeah,
And
whatever.
so, again, I think you've given us a great foundation of kind of where you're at. So as far as what influenced or inspired you to do philosophy, you've already really touched base on that a little bit. But I do want to further market your podcast a little bit more before we start picking your brain on
Sure.
some specific parts of the process. So I guess we know what really inspired you to start going into philosophy and maybe looking at things from a rational perspective. So I guess what I want to know is what finally influenced you to take that step. And it's one thing to be interested into it, but there's another thing to put your face behind a microphone and start actually like producing content and creating Little Philosophers. So what I guess inspired you or influenced you to take that final step and actually start doing the podcast?
So like I said, Jonah More Alone was something that I'd looked into. Answers and Reason guys got me into philosophy, and I've been like, you know what? Yeah, someday maybe. And every once in a while I would bring it up, in Twitter discussions and such. And randomly, one of the people that I found super helpful and is one of my favorite people to listen to and to talk to is Anthony Magnabosco. Have you ever heard of this guy?
No, I've never heard of him.
Okay. So he's out of Texas, and he does street epistemology. So basically, he goes out onto the street, and instead of preaching, he goes up to somebody and says, pick a subject, any subject you want. He used to start mainly with the God question because that's the easiest one. And he goes, tell me what you believe and why. And that was it. That was the end of it. And he would let them talk, and he would use that Socratic questioning and say, well, why do you believe that? What are your reasons for this? If, why do you believe this book instead of this book? And how are these people different than you? And he would just get in. He wouldn't do anything but ask questions. He didn't really have any kind of goal except to get down to the basis, to the foundation of why somebody believes something and whether or not they had good reasons to. And one day I mentioned the podcast, the idea for the podcast, and he goes, Josh, seriously, you need to do this. You need to do this. This would be amazing. If you start it, he's like, if it sounds okay, I'm not promising anything now, but if you're a reasonable person and you get this going, he's like, I'll back you. I love this idea. And I don't know if anybody has ever done it before. I've never heard of it. And that was kind of the kicker. I'm like, I really respect this guy. And he does a lot of YouTube stuff. He's just out there in that community. And I was like, wow, if a content creator at that kind of level is like, you seriously need to do this, then I'm like, you know what? I started just looking into how much time would it take? How much effort is it going to take? And then something struck me that I was like, what am I leaving behind? What kind of a legacy, right? I'm an older dad. I didn't start having kids until I was mid-30s. I might not be around for grandkids or great-grandkids or, even my kids, growing up. But what am I going to leave behind? And on top of this, I'm like, these are questions that I can train myself and start teaching my own kids about. I have a lot of religious people in my family, and I've I've promised myself and my wife that we're not going to indoctrinate our kids as atheists. We're gonna leave them as a blank slate. But I know the subject's gonna come up. And I'm like, you know what? Instead of indoctrinating them with something that I believe, I'm gonna indoctrinate them with the tools to make their own good decisions. And then I'm gonna leave it at that. And
That
as
was
long as
probably one of the best quotes I've heard on the show since I've been doing this. Go ahead, Josh. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. I mean, that was the final nail. I was like, I want to do this for my kids anyway. This is something that I want to teach my kids. I started listening to, or I started reading these stories, at bedtime. And I'm like, these stories are chock full of philosophy. Like, this is amazing. And it really makes it easy. You find the right books, you find the right stories, and the questions just like seep out of you after you read them. So yeah, I mean, it's for my kids, but to have a content developer like that say, you got to do it. You got to make the jump. That was the last thing that pushed me over the edge to buy a microphone and start it up, see what happened.
Yeah, I don't think that people realize how truly easy it is to really actually get started on it. As far as the buying stuff, like this is probably like $60 of a mic,
Right?
and it's free to set up an account on most media places just to start an RSS feed and whatnot. That stuff's just basic knowledge on electric. But I love your story about what gave you the confidence to do it. I wouldn't even thought that a content creator on YouTube would have tell you that, hey, this would be a great idea. It's an untapped field to kind of get into, and that they would back you. What a great confidence boost to hear. And I'm going to definitely look him up. I think that sounds really interesting. I think that just your whole insight into doing it and why it's important. And I don't know if Litha wrote it down, because a lot of times she'll be thinking of the same question I am. But I know for sure at some point I thought about asking you. I just didn't want to be too invasive, is because I know that you and your wife have 3 children. And I knew that at some point, the religion thing is going to come up. At some point, you have to deal with that. But I guess this would be a great time to ask you about what you kind of Easter egged earlier and brought this up.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I want to know is you've guinea pigged this a little bit on your own kids, and that these stories that you're doing and the questioning. I guess I want to ask you now is it's killing me. I'm really curious of how has it gone? I guess from the time that you started doing it to now, what's it like to ask them those questions and to hear them kind of fight through the answers and do that struggle? But the struggle is like the best part of seeing them do that. I got to know what that's been like for you.
So the struggle's not the best part.
Oh yeah, you're right. I guess that would be the best part.
No, it's a wonderful part. The best part is when they answer the question in a completely hilarious and off-topic way that you would never take the question in the first place. That's probably the funniest part. I can't remember off the top of my head any of the ones that Adam's answered like that. But when you ask a question as a 38-year-old and they answer it as a 4-year-old, and you like slap yourself in the forehead and you're like, yeah, of course a 4-year-old's going to answer it that way. Those are the best. That's the best. I don't know how it's going yet. I've been doing it with Adam for 6 months now, maybe a little bit longer than that. Because once I got into Jenna's stuff, I was like, oh, I'm going to start doing this with my own kids. So I'd grab a couple of books off her website and make sure that they were on the list when we went to the library, and I'd pick them out and talk about specific things about them. And he usually does really well. We actually started, we just have a spiral notebook in his room, and every once in a while, I guess it happens when he starts to have problems acting out maybe, or not acting the right way. And I've written down probably 12 or 13 attributes that I think are found in somebody that you would call a good person. And we talk about things like integrity and charity and honesty and gratitude. And curiosity and respect and just these general topics. And, we talk about those things too. I ask him to kind of come up with his own Aesop's fables sometimes. I'm like, tell me a story about gratitude, and he'll come up with his own story about it. And I think some of these, being able to talk a little bit deeper about specific stuff is a byproduct of asking these questions all the time. I try not to get too in depth. I don't ask him 10 questions. Sometimes I do. Sometimes he tells me, I don't want to do this anymore. Can we read another book? Or the best part is, once in a while, we'll be riding in the car, and he goes, Dad, can you turn on the guy that tells the stories? I'm like, yeah, we can turn on the guy who tells the stories.
The random guy.
So I think he's made the connection, but he still says, like, hey, can you turn on the guy who tells the stories? So we listen to the story, and we'll get to the point where I start asking questions, and I'll get to like the second question, and he goes, okay, next one. So, but yeah, he's not doing it on his own yet. He's not 5 yet. He's not quite there. I don't know if that's just him. I've heard stories and anecdotes about kids doing it when they're 3 and 4 years old. But I just don't think he's quite there yet. But, it's just planting that seed, right? Mm-hmm. You just keep watering it, and you wait for it to grow someday, and you wait for him to ask some amazing question, and you're like, that was worth it. It was worth everything I did. But yeah, it's just because right now behavioral stuff is the big thing for him, trying to learn what a good person is, how to treat his brothers right, how to treat his friends right, how to treat me and his mother right. That's why we talked about integrity, honesty, and respect first, when we started doing this book, and like gratitude afterwards and that kind of stuff. Because it's all, treat others how you want to be treated. What's respect? Well, that's not treating somebody how you want to be treated. Like, respect is really more like treat others how they want to be treated, right? So, and then integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's watching, which is really important for 4 and 5 years old, especially when we've got other little ones around the house.
Sorry, I'm putting, for those who are listening in the podcast, I'm writing stuff down on a piece of paper, little titles
of
Lisa,
you can jump in anytime you want.
I know, I just don't want to interrupt him. I know, I just don't want to interrupt him, but I was writing down on a notebook saying different titles of books that show integrity and like behavioral, quote unquote, behavioral problems or issues and such. And as a pre-K teacher, we had to do those a lot. And just to show, like, ask, what do you think they should have done? Like, we would pause the book and we'd be like, what do you think they should have done instead? And then they'll say, oh, I think they should have done blah, 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 blah. So it gives them the chance to actually think about them in their shoes. And of course, the two-year-olds are more of like an egotistical area, so they're not really going to say they should have done this. You have to put it in a way where like, let's use their name for an example. Like, let's say if their name was Anthony, be like, Anthony, you did this, what would you do if this happened when you did it? And then they might be able to respond that way. But typically it's really hard for them to, because they think of things in I did this, or whatever. And whenever you get to the 3.5 to 5, around there, they're starting to venture out more so in a way where they are actually thinking of other people's feelings. And a way to begin that would just be saying, oh, I'm going on a teacher rant, I know. But a way to begin that would just be like, oh, they did that, what if they did that to you, or what if that happened to you, how would you feel? Like, it would make you feel very sad, or would it make you feel happy that you did that, or whatever? And if they're saying, yeah, that would make me feel happy, this is what I would do as a teacher. I'd be like, okay. And then I would take like the toy away from them and be like, how do you feel? It's mine now, I'm putting it up. And then they'll say, no, I'm so sad. And I'm like, then there you go, let's give it back to them, or whatever. But No, David is a really good book for stuff like that, where they're in the classroom and the teacher's saying, no, David, we don't do this. No, David, we don't cut people's hair. Yeah. And at the end, it's saying, yes, David. And
so if I could jump in real quick, I would love for you and anybody else who's listening, if you guys have suggestions for stories in books, please go to my Facebook page, go to the Facebook group, get in there, and just, I don't care if the only thing you do in the group is to leave me a list of like
probably has a
20
list
books.
I have a list right here.
So that's great. So the only kicker with those is that because I'm reading the story in its entirety, I have to get permission from either the publisher or the author.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That can be a huge pain sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure these books that I was thinking of are like pretty known books. So I'm sure that it's harder to get in contact with them. But there's the Bad Guys book series for those who are older. Let's say that you have a kid that's like 7. They have a book out and it's in Walmart and you can find it, and it's called The Bad Guys. And it's really good too. And I actually got it for my nephew who doesn't like reading at all, and I sat there out on the front porch and read that book to him and was given all the characters different like voices, and I was like, do 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 says the werewolf, or whatever, and he was cracking up at me. He was laughing so hard I thought he was gonna pee himself. It was so funny. But another book I would say is Rainbow Fish, Kissing Hand, and then of course the book with no pictures. I love that book so much, but that's just a funny, goofy like book to do. But anyway, keep going.
No, that's fine.
Josh, something that got me thinking, just because this is an old man reference for us, but if I go back to some of the children books that we had, not just the Dr. Seuss ones, but if we just take like Curious George books or the Dr. Seuss books that we had, and whenever I've been in a few Barnes and Nobles and other bookstores, or like a used bookstore, one of those discount places, if I find them, I'll go over in the children's section and I'll just grab one of them with the mindset that I'm trying to do philosophy. I'm like, I'm going to see if I can do what Josh does every week. I started reading like an old Curious George book, and you're right. It's weird because it's like when you said something so like enlightening earlier. You said that you and your wife are going to give your children, not indoctrinate them, not give them a certain kind of dogma, but actually give them the tools to decide these certain things. Whenever I was actually teaching humanities in high school, that's what I really wanted to do with philosophy is, so hey, if I show you this movie, like if we watch Shawshank Redemption, or even if it's a children's movie like Zootopia, for example, Frozen and Zootopia actually have a lot of philosophy in them. And you just have to know where to look and how to look. And I've had, and this is what I wanted to do a follow-up question with you on. I've had former students over the last 4 or 5 years message me on social media and go, hey, Mr. Malcolmson, I just want you to know you ruined the movies for me forever, the rest of my life. And they mean it in a joking way because they can't watch anything, even a children's movie anymore, without seeing it, the morality, the epistemology, the metaphysics, the aesthetics, or justice, good, bad, all these different things. And I love like the moral stuff. Like I'm big into morality. I love doing those kind of discussions. So I guess, Josh, this might be too early to ask you, but since you've been doing your social media, your Facebook group, and the podcast, have you received any feedback from people that have been trying this after listening to your episodes?
No. Sadly, I don't get I don't get much action on the Facebook group at all. I mean, most of it is friends and family right now.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if they're listening.
Yeah.
They might just be part of
This is fun.
They might just be part of the group to be supportive of me.
Yeah.
I don't know if people with kids just don't have time to talk about philosophy on a Facebook page, but the point of the page was to make it non-confrontational and non-politic, and so that the kids could get on there, so that somebody who is, I don't know when kids start using Facebook. My kids aren't old enough yet, but when I do the questions and I do the stories, I aim for I try to think of what would a 5 to 12-year-old be able to answer or be able to really think about. So that's kind of the age group that I shoot for. And then, like you were saying earlier, I do try to level up the questions a little bit as I go. I try to lead them in a certain way in order to get the maximum potential out of a book. Starting with very general questions and then moving in a little more detail at a time, and maybe like nudging them in a certain direction to kind of get a feel for maybe what the core story of the book was actually about. But that's about it. Sometimes the last 2 questions might be about something specific, maybe intended for a preteen. But yeah, I try to keep them pretty vague and open for everybody.
So, okay, I think you should rethink your age range because not like that. I'm not saying that like oh change. No, I'm saying like
I think you should do that.
So I'm not trying to say that. So I think you're selling yourself short. I think you can these questions are good for 3-year-olds too. There's multiple times where you had said, how do you think this person feels, or how of course you use bigger words and such, and I use those in my classrooms as well. And even if the parents were to stop and pause and be like, so what do you think about it? And the kid can say, oh, well, I don't know what this means. And then that can provoke more conversation with parent and child, I believe. So, so they'll be able to be like, oh, and I loved it whenever my kids went up to their parents and said stuff like, oh, this is my hypothesis or whatever. And it cracked me up every time because they would mispronounce it or whatever.
Right.
And yeah.
Oh, just to jump off of that. So on the Facebook page, I put up basically it's like a PowerPoint slide, and half of the PowerPoint is my logo, and the other half is just a word or a philosopher. And I probably in maybe 7 or 8 sentences, just sum up an idea or a person and what their basic stuff was. And recently, I think the last one I might have put up was metaphysics. And then in the comment, it was like, listen, my 2-year-old can say excavator and astronaut and Tyrannosaurus. Metaphysics it's just a word. Get over it. It's not a problem. It's just, why are things here? What are they? What makes them real?
See,
and a 3 and a 4-year-old love those questions.
Oh yeah, and they love feeling like they are a part of an adult conversation too. They don't like the, oh, you're so cute today. What are you doing wearing this? They want to hear oh, I'm wearing fuchsia pink, or whatever, bigger words and words that will help push themselves. Because I don't know how many times I've been asked Miss Litha, where does a volcano come from? Miss Litha, what is tectonic plates? I'm not kidding you. I was asked these questions by 3.5-year-olds, or what makes an earthquake when we talk about tectonic plates, and they're like, what's a tectonic plate? These things come up, and even though some people might say, oh, that's too big of a word for my kid, I'm always like, well, have you asked your kid what that word means? Maybe you should ask them if they even know. And then they'll say, oh, Johnny, what's this word? And then they'll tell them what they think it is. And it cracks me up every single time, because I think one time one of the parents, we were talking about tectonic plates, and they were like, do you know what a tectonic plate is? And they said, yeah, it's the United States. And I laughed so hard, and we were all laughing. And and they said, yeah, we're slamming in with Canada.
So this is like, this is where
Oh,
the
man.
internet has like changed parenting forever. And it's changed it for the good, right? So much. You get a question like that, and my mom wasn't very educated. She never went to college. If I would have went to her as an 8-year-old and asked her what a tectonic plate is, and she would have been like, I don't know. And you don't need to know either, and you shouldn't
Or they
worry
might
about
send
it.
you to the library and you have to use the Dewey Decimal System to find some book
Right?
that was buried there by Da Vinci to figure out what it was.
But I think the greatest thing that this has done is that now I can say, I have no idea what that is, but we should look it up together and figure it out together. And
I've said that so many times too.
that experience to be able to show your vulnerability and your ability to bring yourself down to their level, and like, oh, mom and dad don't know everything. Like, no, I don't. I know a fraction of the things that you even think that I know.
Yeah.
So like, when they ask these questions, it's about like, let's figure it out together. And that's when you take like the questions that I asked during the podcast and the whole basis behind it, and you put it into action, and you say, okay, instead of just asking questions to you about things that I think I know, like, you've stumbled upon something that I have no idea about. So we're going to ask the questions to each other together and figure out the answers together. And I'm going to actually show you, I'm going to take you to a page that has bad information, and I'm going to take you to an internet page that has good information. And we're going to be like, well, that seems silly. And these are the reasons why I don't think that this is really the right answer. So maybe we should look somewhere else, and we can go somewhere else. And I can say, oh, we're going to go to a museum's website, and let's go find out what the museum thinks, instead of, Joe Schmo, who has no credentialing at all, that kind of a thing. It's the same thing. It's like what, well, I guess you can't really do like art and that kind of stuff because it's so subjective that there really isn't a right or wrong answer. But
well, you had that whole podcast episode where I think 90% of your questions for that one story was based around art. I think it was your first story.
Yeah, Ish.
About what? Yeah, Ish. Yeah, I've listened to it, I think 3 times.
Oh, so good.
It's so good. But it is a good chance to teach kids what relative and subjective really is. That something that, I mean, it's like one man's trash is another man's treasure. One kid might see a toy as really valuable or not very valuable, but then the next kid next to him could see that is their favorite one. And I don't know, it's so unique to see it. I don't know why that the rabbit story, I don't know why it all reminds me of Toy Story. If you go back to whenever we were younger, when Toy Story first came out, even a movie like that has so much philosophy in it. And I think Josh, I'm interested on this, is that you kind of talked about the accessibility of philosophy and knowledge earlier. Mm-hmm. Why do you think, because I get this a lot here, why do you think people, maybe not necessarily kids, but why do you think people in general get intimidated by philosophy? I feel like when you bring up, hey, let's do a little philosophy with kids or have a philosophical discussion with other adults our age, the first reaction I usually get is it's a little bit of intimidation. Why do you think people get intimidated by it?
I mean, they're big questions. They're huge questions. And what makes it intimidating is the more experience and the more you know about life and about other people, the crazier those questions seem, the more difficult they seem, the more loaded they seem. But to a 3 or 4 year old, life is easy. They have no experiences. It's tabula rasa, right? They're a blank slate. They have hardly anything written on there. They don't have any confirmation biases. They don't have, they don't see the world as red and blue or black and white, or, they don't have that kind of prejudice and, and bias is already loaded up. So it's not hard. It's not hard for them to take a question that it questions everything they know, but they don't really know that much, right? So they're like, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. Like, oh, I'll change my mind on that. When you talk about it, if you relate it to back to what happened to me a couple of years ago when I had an existential crisis about my faith, like religion is the core of of people, and to be able to work your way through that and then work your way back out of it. That was scary. It was scary for me. I took a year after I did that Google search. I started watching those debates, and I promised myself, I'm like, it's going to take me a year. I'm going to read the Bible. I'm going to study the Bible, because what I said was, if there's a God out there and this religion's true, then it should be obvious. It should be so obvious that I have no problem just opening my arms back up and just walking straight back to it without any issue. And I started questioning and asking, and it never came. I was always taking a step back. I was never taking any steps forward. So it's like that. It's scary for an adult. It's scary. It's life-changing for an adult. Sometimes the right question can change your life. But for a 3 and a 4-year-old, they're just learning. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're just learning. They're just soaking everything up. And that's why the goal is, like I said, I'll probably repeat it again. It's not to teach kids what to think. It's to teach them how to think.
Mm-hmm.
So they can take all that in.
Yeah. I should grab that as a soundbite and put it at the beginning of the show. But it really is. I mean, if you think about it, in our education system, Litha and I have both been in public education. I'm going into my 12th year as a teacher. I've taught freshmen all the way up to seniors. I don't care if it's the pre-K level all the way up, we're trying to give them tools to be a part of a social society. Like, whether they like it or not, they're going to have to grow up in a society where they're going to have to deal with other people. And we have to teach them to be able to understand, to be empathetic, and all these other kind of qualities. And Josh, to be honest with you, if I was lucky enough to have a child of my own and they got to the age of 3, if I knew about your podcast, I'd be trying to start it as soon as I could. And right? Even if I didn't know about your podcast, if I just even knew about your idea of questioning, is people read children's books to their kids all the time. Why not, when you end the story, why not ask questions at the end or during, or like Litha say, why not start off with a couple of generic questions at the beginning to think about as you're reading through something? I just think it's I don't know how that could hurt. I guess what I'm saying is, if you're trying to look at it in a critical perspective, in what way could someone even argue logically that would be a bad thing? Surely it has to come out as being good. Now, I am kind of surprised that you've yet to have a parent message you and say, hey, do you have an answer key that go with these questions that you provide? Because I go back to Abraham Lincoln's quote about better to be thought of as a fool than to speak up and remove all doubt. Or right. You can look at Nietzsche and say, well, be careful looking into the abyss, because the abyss might look back into you again. I think there is a little bit of a fear factor of ignorance. It's like, well, what if I become aware of all these things and I'm that ignorant? I had a fellow teacher. She was an awesome teacher. She used to famously say to her students, listen, as a history teacher, sometimes students think you're an expert of all history. I have friends that will ask me about the Roman Republic or Russian Republic. And I'm like, I have no idea. I specialize in the Civil War and military history. But it's not that I know a lot. And what she famously says, a teacher to her students, is that I know a little bit about a lot of stuff. And I think that's what it is that people can have a small talk conversation, but it's like your friend that does the YouTube channel. It's like when you really dig deeper, you don't have to be a jerk. Just dig deeper. There's not a lot of depth there to what they know, and that's why I like metaphysics. It's nothing against epistemology. I love it, especially with my own struggle with religion. I also like metaphysics because it gets into time and substance and being and all these other things too that I just get really interested in as well. So I find that was really great. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, Josh. I'm
Sure.
sorry. I think you wanted to say something there. You want to add anything?
I think I lost it.
Go ahead,
I did though.
Oh, okay, go. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask my question that I was beforehand. We started talking about questioning and such, and I think this is a great time to ask it.
Sure.
I'm going to take over the screen while you do that, just to show it.
Oh, okay. So,
Is this what you're going to be asking about?
Yes,
right here?
I'm going to be asking about Erik Erikson. So I don't know if you know who Erik Erikson is. He is a German-American developmental psychologist and psychoanalyst. In like the 1940s to 1950s, he created the stages of psychosocial development based off of Sigmund Freud's study that he did for psychosexual development. And that's just like 1 through 5 or whatever, from like doing oral, anal, and other kind of what's it called? Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. But basically, it's like the oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital stages, the 5 stages of learning whenever you're young. And for example, like when I say oral, I'm meaning like infants putting things into their mouths.
Mm-hmm.
And then anal, I'm meaning like understanding their bowel movements or whenever they have to use the restroom and such like that. That's what I'm meaning by that. But Erik Erikson has these stages of psychosocial development, which the question that I have is mainly for the first 3.
Okay.
We can do the first 4, but the first 3 on those is trust versus mistrust, anatomy versus shame and doubt, and initiative versus guilt. And my question is, are your questions intended to push those boundaries or designed to stay within the cognitive development of those boundaries?
No, I don't look at this. I know of it, but
Okay.
I've never actually applied it to my questions. I just take an instinctual view on it. I mean, I have a 2.5 and I have a 5-year-old, and oddly, after I've started doing this, I don't know if these memories are accurate, but I think I remember being a kid and asking myself some of these questions. And just to go on a short diversion, I think that's why we should always push kids, because it seems like I have this feeling like my entire like elementary school life, I was never pushed to what I thought I could do. And I always had these questions, but it never felt right to ask anybody about them. Which leads me to believe that kids are they're so curious about their entire world, and they're curious about things that we would label as metaphysics and label as ethics and morality and label as epistemology and logic. And I feel like they just soak it up. So short answer, no. I do know of Erik Erikson. I watched a couple of YouTubes on him, so obviously I'm an expert.
You're an armchair expert. That's what it is.
Yeah. So I'm at the first peak of the Dunning-Kruger. Have you guys know the Dunning-Kruger thing? Yeah. So first peak. I think I know everything. But no, I don't intentionally apply them. I got a lot of ideas from Jana's website about the type of questions, and I've listened to a couple of her lectures. Listening to Anthony talk to adults and young adults with a street epistemology gives me a ton of ideas. But that's the thing. The tricky part of this is narrowing those questions down. It gets me because you're like, oh, it's a children's book. You just asked a bunch of questions. And I think it was you, Robbie, that commented on this. I was like, somebody had a quote at one point in time that was like, you don't know something unless you can explain it to a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I am living in that right now, like with everything. So it's super hard to like come up with the vocabulary so that they understand. Because but part of the reason I want this podcast to be something that maybe just a 7 or 8 year old just wants to listen to. Like my kids love listening to NPR's Wow in the World and just sitting down and listening to it. And I can go off and do something else. But you know what? I know they're learning some pretty cool stuff and it's reliable information. So I kind of like that. I'd like people to think of my podcast in the same way. Like if you got a kid, you can just sit them down in front of it, have them think about some stuff. That's why I read the story in full. So even if they don't have the book or don't have access to the story, they do. I give it to you right at the beginning. And then you guys can talk about the questions. Or, you know, he can stop, and if he's got a question, he can stop the podcast and run over to you and be like, hey, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, what the hell is this guy? What the hell is this guy asking you? Like, what?
That's what I was thinking is what happens sometimes is that the kid will stop it and be like, Dad, Mom, what about this? What does this mean? Or whatever. And
so my worst
nightmare, hope that it does.
My worst nightmare was doing the Velveteen Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's my favorite one, actually.
It is. So I really like Sneetches. It's probably one of my favorite children's stories ever. But the Velveteen Rabbit is definitely second. Those two stories were they were the most fun to make. Obviously, I did Sneetches because of the time and place of what was going on, and I had read it to my kids, and Adam and I had talked about things extensively, you know, about the George Floyd thing and about racism and stuff and white privilege, and but yeah, the Velveteen Rabbit, like just questioning what's real and what's not. I'm like, some kid's going to ask their parents if Santa's real, and then they're going to never listen to my podcast again.
Yeah. Well, that's something. It's weird because if it questions the, I guess the norm, you're always at kind of a risk for that.
Hang on. So that thought that I lost before, when you were talking about why people wouldn't do this and that it's so safe. But it's not for a lot of people. They feel like they have to indoctrinate their children with information that they can't be gay, that they can't be a Democrat or Republican, that they can't be an atheist, or they can't be a Buddhist, or they have these core beliefs that they're core to them and to their family. And inside, they're not sure if they could respect or even keep this child in their own home if they were not to believe the same way. So it's so scary that this indoctrination takes over them. And that's the time when somebody might hear this podcast and hear the way that I'm questioning things and be like, they might literally say, that's the devil. Don't listen to that. That type of thing.
Depending on where you're listening to it.
Yeah. So that's, sorry, it just popped back in my head. I just spit it out.
Litha and I live in the Bible Belt. And even as much as I critically try to look at everything, neither one of us picked up an anti-religious or a secular sentiment from it. But I get when you use words like rationalism, and over the course of world history, things like reason and rationalism has butted heads notoriously with the church and whatnot. I get it, but the questions themselves can be so abstract sometimes or ambiguous. It can throw people off. And for some people, it might be easy for them if a kid has a question like that to say, well, you can talk to your pastor or your preacher about it. I don't really know what to say. And then some people are just not okay saying, I don't know. They don't want to appear they don't know as much as they thought they did. But you're right. When you're getting into things that are questioning your value system and the foundation of who you're going to be, it can be rough and it can be scary for some people. And I get that. I guess what I'm hoping, Josh, is people like all of us and so many other people like Jan and others can make philosophy less scary. And I'm hoping that sometime way after we're dead and gone, maybe it won't be as scary as it used to be. Maybe we can help make it marginally less scary than it was before. But hey,
it's easy.
All you have to
question. Oh, sorry. All you have to do is pretend you're a 3-year-old, and you just keep asking why.
Yeah, that's all.
I mean, that's the basis of it. Like, why? Well, why?
I told Litha I had this shirt. It's a navy blue shirt because our school colors. It just says, it just says why on it, because I just tear my students up on that. I'm constantly asking them why and to explain themselves. If they make a claim or a statement, they have to be ready to defend. And what you get a little bit less people like offering complaints and a little bit because they don't have a solution to really back. I mean, you teach some certain things like that too, and you just have to build a foundation of, well, I do like every once in a while I'll get a parent that'll come into a parent-teacher conference and go, so you're the one that's causing my kid to question everything. And what they mean is like question authority and rules that are put on, or if they get punished at home, but there's not justice or logic behind the punishment that can be expressed, then the kid's a little bit more, I guess, reluctant to be abiding by it. Of course, I'm getting kids 13 to 18 years old, and that's that point of your life. You're really striving to be independent and everything. You're kind of getting more of that butting heads. What I was going to say as a compliment to you, Josh, is I'm going to do the reverse of the thing. You said it goes up to about 12, but I'm telling you, I think you would be surprised on how many teenagers also like but also struggle with those questions. One of the episodes, it might have been the first one after your introduction one, so maybe episode 2. I think you did. I can't remember which one it was. The first question you asked is, "What is real?" And I can't remember which episode that was. It might not have been that early, but just asking.
That's the Velveteen Rabbit.
No,
I did that one.
Yeah, my bad. So, just asking an adult. Have you ever asked another adult, "Hey, let's have a discussion. What's real?" And that for some adults, it like blows their mind. And for kids too. Like I always start off the school year. I ask the kids 4 questions. I ask them, what is good? What is bad? What is justice? What is truth? And believe it or not, as short as those 4 are, those are some of the most difficult ones to write, for them to write about, to really discuss about. Now, for some of the ones that tend to be more religiously influenced, it's a little easier. And you kind of understand then why people are as grounded as they are in religion, because it does provide those things. It does provide this foundation for some of these understandings. And then the kids that might be more secular, they have a little bit harder time deciding those particular things. So I understand, like even as a secular person, I understand why people tend to be very grounded in faith and religion, because for some of these questions that may not have answers to them, it provides at least some type of understanding.
Or at least you just hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. Yeah. People are so scared of questions that don't have answers, or that they can't answer, or the only answer is I don't know, or it could be 6 different things.
Yeah.
That
also a belief that maybe some things are not meant to be answered by us. Is some of the belief on the other side is that we shouldn't even really touch that, because it's not something that we're meant to really understand. And to me, I don't want to ever deter anybody from ever asking me any kind of a question if they want. I have to ask something else in regards to your podcast. I'm a little curious on you, and this might be another early question to ask. So I'm going to combine my number 6 and 7 question that I had for you originally. You've been doing philosophy for about 4 years, or a little over 4 years, and especially with focus on epistemology. And you've been doing Little Philosophers this year. Just combining both those together over these last 4 years, what have you learned about yourself?
Oh, man. Wow.
It's a weird question. I know. I had to ask.
No, that's okay. My entire life, the thing that I've hated the most is people who are hypocritical. So once I started delving into philosophy and asking myself some of these questions, my life's just changed. It's just changed a lot because I'm like, I don't have a good reason to believe this anymore, so I can't believe it. And I just drop it. I'm like, done. Because I can't, there's something inside of me that's like, given the right amount of information and a good enough argument, I can't just pretend, you know? So a lot of things in my life have changed. I think I feel like I haven't been me for a long, long, long time. I feel like there's been this outer coating of what I was, what I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to believe, what people told me, my religion, my parents, and now since I jumped into that and started looking at that for myself, I'm making my own decisions. I don't think something's good or bad because anybody tells me anything. I think it's good or bad because of what I've learned, what I've realized is important, what the core of ethics really are. And it's shaken a poorly built house to the ground. And now I'm finally rebuilding the mansion that I'm supposed to live in. I guess it would probably be the best analogy.
House that is Josh Perry, is the second version of the house, is it being built earthquake proof? Is it a stronger foundation that this one is built on? Because the way you
I think it is.
Yeah, it sounds like.
Because what I mentioned earlier about always questioning your own beliefs. I'm walking around to the foundation all the time with a sledgehammer to make sure that none of these bricks move, none of this stuff moves. And if I find a hole, then I patch it up with whatever is supposed to be there. You know, it's not, questioning yourself all the time.
You know, Josh, what you had said earlier, it was extremely meaningful, by the way. Your answer, I love the pause that you did beforehand, because it is kind of a tough question for someone to ask you. I mean, if someone were to come up and ask me, what have I learned about myself in the 11 years as a teacher or the 2 years I've been doing philosophy, it's kind of a hard thing to nail down off of that. But I think the way you put it, I think that definitely influences me and Litha's way of thinking. It's definitely changed the way that I feel going forward. I want to take some of your advice off of what you had said earlier too. I also kind of get why that can be scary again for other people. When you said earlier that it kind of seemed almost like a house of cards in a way previously, and it kind of had to be crumbled down and then built back up again. So I can see why, if your 30 years of your life or so is built and you find out that it may be a house of straw or cards, metaphorically, that could cause you to have an existential crisis. And I know that there's a joke about 40-year-old men having existential crises, like buying a sports car. But I think there's definitely different types of midlife crises that could happen that cause you to think different. But I love the way you followed it up, though. You said the new foundation, the new way this house of Josh that's built is much stronger now, and you feel like it's something that's based off of something else. Now, when you said that you felt like you lost a part of yourself or you didn't really know who you were, do you feel like you have understood that better now? Do you feel like you have a better understanding of who you are and who you want to be now than what you did 20 years ago or 10 years ago?
Yeah, and I understand the old me so much better now. I understand why I didn't feel quite right about certain things. Like The Matrix, why when I watched a movie like that, some people are like, man, the fight scenes were amazing. And I'm like, we could be living in the Matrix right now. And it's like, that's like my perspective. They're like, oh, the Kung Fu stuff and the fighting and the slow motion bullets. And I'm like, the Jesus character that he carries around with him about being the savior and like coming across this path, and then like like the references to Buddhism and epistemology and hard solipsism and like all of the things, and like so it's looking back, it's that hindsight is 2020 and saying that's why I didn't feel comfortable when my parents told me these things, and I was like, I don't know about that. Something about that's not right, but I'm gonna. I keep taking digs at religion, and I don't mean to.
Yeah, I understand.
Did I freeze?
Yeah, I think your camera just froze.
Okay.
Did it run out of its battery, or is it?
I think it might have.
Okay, it's a pretty good timing. Josh, while you're just doing that, I can still hear you fine. You're still coming through on the audio. And Litha, what I will do this is that just to kind of get some thoughts in while you're just kind of transitioning. I know that we had just hit the 1.5 hour mark. I can't believe it's already been an 1.5 hour. So, Josh, we wanted to respect your time and respect you might have to go, you have to go to work early in the morning. And I definitely, I don't know if you feel like you would want to. Would you be interested in doing a part 2?
Oh, definitely.
All right, good.
I feel the same as John. I mean, we can have a series. I don't care.
I mean, John, he had that charismatic. I mean, I don't know if I've ever had a speaker like him before. He was so energetic, and you gotta love John. He's great, and just his overall excitement and fervor for philosophy, it's contagious.
Yeah, his energy is amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. and Josh, I have to say to you, it's like I wouldn't feel bad about that part when you said that you might have focused a little bit heavier on religion than what you maybe ideally wanted to do tonight. But at the same time, it's also, this episode was more about getting to the foundation of who you are now, and what's really shifted you. So there might be listeners that maybe really need to hear something like this, that live all over the country and other places. And I respect that. I respected your outlook on that. I will say this, Josh, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of choose something, because I know you wanted to kind of stop around a 2 hour mark. We could stop right now and just do the closing argument or closing thoughts section. Sorry, I have a law club, so I have closing argument stuck in my head. But we can do a closing thoughts section and move the next part to part 2, which we could do whenever you're available next time. And we'll just ask the rest of what we were going to talk about. Or we could finish the show by doing the 3 random questions, which is supposed to be pretty quick and thought-provoking, and then we can close it out. Which would you rather do?
Let's do the random questions, because it's my favorite part of your podcast.
Awesome. That's great. I just want to show something. This means a lot to me. So for the last, I would say 11 years of my career, I've been using this book. I wanted to put the visual up on there. And for some reason, it's getting a little bit harder to find, but I often show it on here. I bought this probably my 3rd year of teaching. And so early on, when I want to teach the Socratic seminar in class, like Josh already knows this, and Litha knows from being in my classroom and actually doing it. A lot of times my class looks more like Alcoholics Anonymous. We're like kind of sitting in a circle and we're discussing through things. And the very first time that me and my fellow teachers, we teach Socratic seminar, I don't even ask questions in history. I mainly do philosophy questions about life, and I get them from this book. This book has over 1,000 of these questions. If you just look on the inside, that's all it is just questions that you can go through, and it has things from life and death, time and space, existence, all of these type of things. It's supposed to encompass all of those on there, so you can do that. So, just to kind of go while Josh takes a break, just real quick, Litha, I'd like to have just a kind of a little conversation with you here, just back and forth, before he comes back and we put him through the torture of the 3 random questions. I just want to ask you, what have you thought of Josh? Just, you and I have got a chance to listen to all of his podcasts. We had this idea of what he would be like. So far, what do you think of Josh Perry?
I hate him. No, I'm just kidding.
I hate him.
He's the worst. No, I really like his ideas, and of course his podcast. I already said earlier that I was really excited to actually talk with him, because just to obviously put a name, his podcast to his face, I was like, oh my gosh, like I was so surprised. And I don't know, it's just been an honor to sit here and talk with him and be able to actually dig in his brain a little bit on what started this whole thing, and what inspires his questions and everything else. So I really, really like his ideas for the podcast. I'm so glad that he sat down and was just like, I don't know. And then his friend said, do it. And was like, I will help you or whatever, or I'll put in a good word. And if it goes good, that's what I was thinking in my head. In my head, I was like, if, but I started laughing at that part. But obviously it seems like it's going very well. So I'm really excited for that. And I'm so surprised that not many people actually view his stuff, except for he said that his family is the only ones that keeps commenting on his Facebook page. But then again, I didn't even know that he had a Facebook page. I'm not gonna lie.
That's okay.
So even then, like, I'm sure after this he's going to gain a couple of followers and some people that are going to check him out. And I do encourage all of you who have children, even if they're young, between after the age of 3 or even after the age of 2, I'm sure they would just enjoy sitting and listening to the stories, because his voice is very relaxing as well. So just, I would listen to his stories, fall asleep, but like listening to your stories. Sorry, it's awesome. Yeah. But
she said she hated you earlier when you walked off. I don't know why she like that.
I'm used to it.
Now we have to say, Josh, that it's been great to have you on the podcast, and putting the face to the voice has been really cool. And to know that both of us I really do feel like I've made a friend in philosophy and a friend in general over the course, because I really feel like if I ever have some questions, not just about religion, but just about anything in philosophy, and if I want to ask them to somebody that really gets into entertaining those questions, I know I can ask you. I just know around your busy lifestyle and your work and your family and doing your podcast, you're just going to have to just, enjoy that time we get to actually discuss things. But like Litha said, I am surprised that not as many people have checked her stuff out, but at the same time, I know that the podcasting market, even on our end too, it's very saturated. There's a lot of people podcasting. And sometimes it's not that, it's the fact that, for me, I just didn't even know your podcast existed until I just happened to stumble across it. So I think, I was given good advice to say that don't ever stop asking people to come on your show. Don't ever stop posting about people. You just have to keep pumping it out there. And over time, if Litha and I, we tell 2 other people that have kids to listen to it and they start listening to it, they could tell 2 people and they could tell 2 people. Not to make it sound like a pyramid scheme, because that's what it sounds like.
Right.
What I mean is that, more people can find out, and the word of mouth still is good. And my thing is just stay humble, Josh, because I can tell no matter how big your listening audience is, it means a lot to you. And I think that's something that's very contagious in a positive way, is that if I know I'm listening to somebody that really, truly cares about it and puts a lot of heart into it, that's worth my time. Litha, go ahead, as I can tell you wanted to say something too.
Yeah, and something I was going to say, which I was going to ask in the next podcast, but I'll just say it here. I would love to absolutely just listen to like your kids' answers too, like just to get, or just create a panel with like some group of, I don't know, 5-year-olds, just to see like what they would say. And like, of course there are people who don't necessarily have children, but there's college kids that are going into early child development, and I'm sure that they would stumble across this and be like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that, or anything, just to get a little taste of what it would even be like, even asking those questions to young children, just to see what the response is, even if you get like multiple different ones, like have one that's like 5-year-olds and then another one that's like 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or whatever, or even like let's ask adults, like get a group of adults in here and see just how their answers differ from each other. So I think that'd be really cool to do, in my opinion. But
yeah, I've thought about it, and I still think Adam's a little young for it, but I think it would definitely be something to neat to do with him. His attention span isn't quite there yet, and like having him sit down with me to do the podcast would.
Oh yeah. You would have to probably have like magnetiles or something. That's whenever I would always ask my questions, is if the kid had had something that they were already like doing with their hands, and they'd be like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know, Miss Letha, or whatever it was.
It would be really cool to see some kind of a panel thing. Just to see it done in person would just be so cool. To even if you sat down at the table with little kids, or you sat down with child development, or even early education teachers, and like you said earlier in the show, Josh, put yourself in the shoes of a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, or a 5-year-old. Think about that when we read this story together, and then I ask these questions. But it would be really cool on video to see you or someone sitting with a group of little kids, read them the story, and then ask the questions the way you do, or show them the recording. I would just love to see just what kids would say. It's just a curiosity factor that would be so much fun to see someday. I mean, in case the YouTube idea ever becomes an option, Josh, that's just one of those ideas. Yeah. I know there's some legal waivers that have to be done in there too.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Lots of legal hurdles. I'm sure that their parents don't want them on video giving random answers out.
Right. Well, I'd really love that. I've thought about this recently, and I'd really love to go to Adam's kindergarten and do this.
Oh,
and ask the teachers to be like,
would be brilliant. Yeah.
Can I just come in and read them a story and just ask them questions for a half an hour?
I'm sure they would let you do it. I'm sure they would.
And then eventually, maybe if the parents were okay with it and the teacher was okay with it, then like I could at least catch the audio and use the audio clips and be like, I'm gonna take out everybody's name. Nobody's gonna know anything. Yeah. You know, it's just going to be children's voices answering these questions, and do something like that. But yeah, the paperwork and the permission stuff would probably be crazy. But
it's just so wholesome though to think of that. It would just be so much fun to watch the reaction. And I'm going to be honest with you, from a teacher's perspective, Josh, we love guest speakers. So we're not going to people offering.
Oh yeah, I loved it when my parents would come in. Sorry, Robbie. I loved it when my parents would come in and like want to read and stuff to their kids, or the kids, and see their friends. And of course it gets the students into it very much, because they're like, oh my gosh, Miss blah 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 is here. This is or let's say this is John's mom.
Dad's here to read to us. Everybody will be all into it. Yeah, and the way you read the stories, Josh, just like the way Litha does it, the way you read it and the tone that you use, you make it feel like it's coming alive, and I think that would be better. And it's nothing against your recording, but imagine if you're sitting there in front of them reading them the book and ask them, I'm sure that helps their attention span too, to hear that. But anyway, Josh, to save you time, because you have to get up early, man. You got to get to work.
Sorry.
You guys are good. Man, I could stay up all night and talk to you guys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That would be a problem for you in the morning. You like us tonight, but when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be like, I hate their guts.
Yeah.
But Josh, you know how this works already. So the point is that you're supposed to answer these questions just kind of your first instinct. You don't have to feel like you overthink them. It's just a fun way to end the show with philosophy every time. And it's really just a way for Litha and I just to hear what you think. So we try to pick some questions that would be exciting and interesting for you to answer, but they're also random too. So if you don't mind, Litha, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and put Josh to the test. Let's see how he handles this. Got it. Okay, so your first question, Josh, is what harsh truths do you choose to ignore?
None.
I knew you were going to say that. I got to know why.
It's the same thing that I was talking about before. I feel like there was a shell around me when I was a younger kid, that there was something inside of me that wasn't right with some stuff, that was always questioning things, but I was told I couldn't question him, or I thought I wasn't supposed to question him. And the whole hypocrisy thing with me, I just can't. There's the truth needs to be known by everybody, no matter what it is. And now there are proper ways of telling people the truth, and depending on their age and their emotional status and everything else that comes along with it. But nothing, you shouldn't hide anything from anybody.
I like what you said, the delivery is important, because I was going to just be a facetious and be like, you mean calling someone an idiot on Facebook and then showing them facts? It doesn't work. Because I mean, we learned from an early age that you should never, if you're going to debate someone, you should never, rule number one, don't attack your enemy. Because if you want them to listen to you, if you disrespect them, you've already lost them. And that's why I don't get what, and we see it mostly, and this is the terrible thing. Josh, you still remember when we were younger, when Facebook first came out, it was a college thing. Now everybody, grandma has it, and it's used more, instead of as a scrapbook, it's used more as like propaganda. But I don't know how many people truly listen to each other on there. But I love your answer. And for some reason, I knew you were going to say nothing on that, because I feel like that's definitely where Josh Perry is now. Your second question, Josh, a little lighter, a little bit easier, but I think this is a good inspirational one for your future book reading stuff. Is life an adventure?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're the one, and there's no guide. You're it. You're doing it. Life is definitely an adventure, because you don't know what's going to happen next. You can't predict it. And you shouldn't rely on anybody else to save you from anything. It should be up to you. And as far as like, I don't know, like taboo subjects, like that's, you should have a background in all that stuff. There shouldn't be anything that's taboo. We should be able to talk freely about everything, and just understand that people want to have a discussion. They don't always want to just prove you wrong.
Exactly. And Josh, from a secular perspective, even if this really is the only life we ever have, why not live it to the fullest and try to experience and try to learn as much as you possibly can and really enjoy that? Your last one, Josh, are scientific facts always reliable?
No, that's been, I mean, it used to be science that the Earth revolved around the sun, or the other way around. The sun revolved around the Earth.
Yeah. Geocentric.
Like that's one of the best examples. I mean, once upon a time, slavery was moral.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have, and some people would be like, well, that's not science, but I think something like that is objectively true.
Yeah.
Like science is not good, or slavery is not good objectively. Like there's reasons that you could say that. But yeah, nothing, everything could change at any minute with just one more fact. Yeah, definitely. I am not.
For some people, that could be very scary.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you don't, you get into knowledge and truth, and can you ever reach 100% knowledge or 100% truth or absolute truth? And no, because you don't know. There could be one more thing that you don't know. Mm-hmm. I mean, so that's always the thing. And that science, I think that's something that a lot of people who are anti-science think, is that science says that it has all the right answers. But it doesn't. It says we've got the best answers based on what we know currently. Like it's not set in stone. So definitely not.
Science is very amendable. Like this is even just the scientific method in general. You test something out. If it doesn't work or you find new information out, scientists, at least most of the time, it seems like, they're very glad to amend things, to change things, to go back, retest things again. That's part of the job. That's part of the experience. And I can't dog that for that or criticize it for that. I guess I have one other personal question to ask you, John. It's been on my mind the whole interview, but you're I think one of the first guests that I've had that have mentioned your family and talked about that. But with what's been going on since January or March, I'm just curious. Your kids may be too young for that, but I want to know, how has the COVID-19, the pandemic, the quarantine stuff, how has it affected your family? It's just been kind of, at least for our generation, it's unprecedented to just lock it down for 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us what that's been philosophically or just psychologically for you and your wife and your kids.
So unsurprisingly, we were very straightforward with the boys. COVID in our house is called the bug. I mean, my wife and I are we're both pharmacists, so we know about virology and the ability to of things to spread per droplet precautions, and we understand that our boys always wear masks whether or not they have to. We always wear masks whether or not we have to. They know they can't see all of their friends. Adam's birthday is coming up at the end of next month, and we're still waffling on what we're going to do. We have two pretty close families that live in town here, and we might just invite them. We're not sure if we would ask them to wear masks while they're here. I think just taking their word on it and knowing that we trust those families, and as long as nobody's actively symptomatic, then I don't think it would be a huge problem, but it's really hard. Our kids, they've reacted to it very well. I think they've handled it a lot better than I have. So the other kicker on this is that Clark was born on St. Patrick's Day, which was literally, at least here in Colorado, it was days before everything hit the fan. So I left work. I left the front lines in the emergency department like a couple of days before it just everything went to crap. So luckily I missed 8 weeks. I've saved up my personal time off and was able to take off 8 weeks for paternity leave and be home with everybody. And it was a little scary when I went back, but during those 8 weeks, they didn't go to daycare. They were home all the time with us. So it was stressful. We definitely saw differences in the kids a little bit. They got a little stressed out that they didn't see anybody besides us. They didn't have any interaction with other boys and girls. But as soon as we saw that it was the structure that was missing, that when they go to daycare, we call it school. I mean, they go to a Montessori school, so it really is like school for them from the beginning. So it was the
sorry.
it was the structure. They were acting out. They weren't being them. And we're like, is it the new baby or is it this thing? And we're like, you know what? We're gonna have breakfast time, and then they're gonna have free play, and then we're gonna come up with a school schedule for them. They're gonna have a class in the morning, and they're gonna have 2 classes in the morning. Then they're gonna have playtime, and then they're gonna have lunch, and then there's gonna be nap or alone time, and then we're gonna have an afternoon class. So by the time I went back to work, there was 1 class a day. We taught 1 thing, not 3, because that's crazy. We learned that quick. But I mean, we taught our 2.5-year-old his alphabet. He barely knew any of it when it started, and he can go A to Z, and he can count 1 to 20 now. And Adam went from kind of sparsely sounding out words to like reading. I can read level 1 like pages. So that's what we found was missing. So we were able to substitute it.
That's good. Well, Josh,
That's amazing.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I know it made Litha super happy to hear that. Now, when you took a little bit of a break earlier, Josh, Litha and I kind of did our closing thoughts thing. I know that you won't be able to hear that until you go back later and listen to it, but we both said kind of what we really appreciated. And I just appreciate having you on here. I'm so glad that you're willing to do a John Altman style part 2 later. I'm very happy to know that you are willing to come back on, and we didn't shun you away or anything like that. So, Josh, the last thing we need to do tonight, as always on the show, we just like to do a closing thoughts with our guests. What did you think of your experience of actually being on the podcast?
Oh, it's great. It's like sitting down and talking with friends. It's awesome. It was easy to set up. You guys gave me the agenda earlier so I could take a look and not be blindsided by things and have an idea of what was coming.
Well, we were
Although,
kind of blindsided. We tried.
so the real reason why I decided not to have you continue the other questions and take the 3 random questions. So if I come back on again, I get another 3 random questions.
Yeah, you gotta get a 3 random one again every episode.
So the one thing, I think the next time if I come on, I think I would want to talk more philosophy, just philosophy stuff, just with you, because I feel
That's
like
what I want to do as well too. Like we did that with John. Is the first episode was more about him and what made him who he was, but I hope that we can have you on multiple times in the future to just talk about philosophy, because now our listeners and we know who Josh is, so let's actually start doing philosophy together.
Yeah, I want to start arguing about hedonism and utilitarianism and how morality is objective and not subjective, and
that can definitely be arranged.
Wasn't it hedonism or was it nihilism? You disagreed with me on the Facebook group one day. You and another former student of mine went after me on. I made a quote about how bad nihilism is, but you had reassured me that it's not necessarily in a certain context always bad, which was a good point. I told Litha, I was like, Josh is really good about making me think deeper than what I post on there. I need to consider all the context that's on there. One of my questions was about context. I still intend on definitely asking you that, but Josh, I'm right there with you. The next episode we do together, we'll actually pick questions. Now, I do want to ask you, when in regards to helping me decide what questions that we can develop, do you have a certain preference? Do you only want to do epistemology? Do you want to do current events type of philosophy? Do you want to do I don't know, classical? I guess I just want to see where are you comfortable at and where would you like to do, or does it not matter?
It really doesn't matter to me.
Awesome.
Probably my favorite thing to talk about is ethics and morality.
Me too. It's my favorite.
But obviously I love metaphysics.
Yeah.
Where did everything come from? Why is it here? What's real? What's not? Concepts versus reality kind of stuff.
We'll do that.
I'm willing to take anything. I'm not a huge fan of deontology. If you want to tackle that.
Well, deontological ethics, I have that as a future podcast episode topic, but I'll make sure that we stay away from that because I don't have any background in that and no knowledge. That's why I wanted to do an episode over deontology later, just because I want to know a little bit about it. But
I don't have a whole lot of in-depth, but
I'll tell you what, after the show's over, I don't think I've ever sent you my list. I have a list of every topic this next year I want to do. So if pick 3 or 4 that you like. Now, I will ask this. A lot of times I have former students on, as you know, or other philosophers like John and other ones on. Mm-hmm. Do you mind if I get a couple of other people to be on the podcast with you? So it's more like a roundtable discussion. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. That's awesome.
Sure.
Well, hey, we'll close the show up because you got to get to bed. But as usual, as I always say to my listeners, please keep your eyes and your mind open and be contagious. Have a wonderful night.